So, Berto, let's answer patron and listener emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
So his first email is from an anonymous listener. She says, I recently discovered lots of porn activity on my partner's phone.
Fun.
I recently discovered lots of porn activity on my partner's phone. We have had this issue for years, and I believe that it's an addiction that he has. He recently has come to the conclusion as well, I think that he has an addiction, but with that, it was also revealed he would be sexting other women multiple times online. I feel shattered. Just chiming in here. So just see, it was revealed he would be sexting other women multiple times online. That could take a number of forms. It doesn't necessarily matter, but it could be sex workers online, right?
Yeah.
Like cam people, right?
Right.
Or it could be just other people in the community. Who knows? We don't have the specifics on that. I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't sex workers that he was sexing with, in terms of what it's matched up with in terms of the porn. But anyway, going on. I feel shattered. He goes back and forth on whether it's cheating or not, and occasionally will apologize. So yeah, right. So that kind of sounds like it's probably sex workers or cam girls or whatever. I feel he's trying to justify his problem. Any input? I feel this is an awful betrayal. So, Berto, is it cheating?
Okay, so first off, spoiler warning, TMI warning, not suitable for warnings. It's a recurring pattern. I open up my browser, I go to incognito mode, and I have certain recurring things that I look up which stimulate me enough to pleasure myself, and that's a thing I do. If someone went through my phone, well, first of all, it was an incognito, and I always close the window, but I suppose, what if I was passed out and someone found me and like, oh my God, I'd be like, why are you going through my phone? Number one. Number two, I would imagine the statistics on people that look up sexy images for stimulating themselves online in this world are really freaking high. Like, I would imagine the percentages are very high. But we got to a different part, because at first it was just like, oh, they have a lot of porn in their phone. And I already had questions. Wait, were they like, hey, look at my phone, look at all the porn I have? Or was it like, I got the phone from them, they didn't know, and then I found all this porn, which I would find a little invasive, quite a bit invasive. But then we moved to, and then...
Well, let me ask you specifics.
Yeah.
You and your wife, have you had an explicit or implicit conversation about what is allowed or okay within the relationship?
Yeah, like 30 years ago.
and what is that agreement?
It was like, it was just not something that mattered to either of us.
That one would look at porn and masturbate.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, even though I was raised Catholic, at some point I dropped the guilt feelings around masturbation. And it was probably in my 20s, maybe a little earlier.
So in your marriage,
and
you've been with her for 30 years-ish, 26, 27 years, married for that long. I guess you've been with her for 30 years, right? Yeah. That is not considered cheating to the two of you.
No,
but other couples, they would have a different rule about that.
Right.
Now, the other thing that I'll say is you got to make sure you have a conversation about that. You can't just like assume and move forward. And I
could have never been with someone that had those issues.
Yeah, I mean, each to their own. Advice.
I'm not saying someone shouldn't or can't. I'm just saying I couldn't have.
Yeah, and vice versa. I'm sure people that have a different point of view could be with you.
But there are levels to this thing. For example, even let's put aside. We'll come back to the they're sexting people, right? Like, but just the porn part. So as an example, even in my relationship, if all of a sudden we're having a budget conversation and it's like, why are we I noticed in the credit card, it looks like we're spending $2,000 a month on something. What is this? And then I'm like, well, it's just some sites I subscribe to. And then it's like, well, what are they? Like, it's porn. Well, that's a whole different thing. Now it's affecting our money, right? Then what if it's like, hey, we said we were going to have a date on Friday. We even got a babysitter. What was the deal? It's like, I wasn't interested. I ended up taking care of myself, porn or something. Or even worse, like, hey, we're leaving. No, you guys go ahead. I'm staying home, and I'm staying home with porn.
Yeah.
Like all these things start affecting our relationships, start affecting our finances. That's different. Let alone then you get to the point of like, well, wait a minute, you're sexting a lot of people, and now if that's understood and agreed upon, fine. Don't need to yuck anyone's yum. But if it's not, and if it's invading on the intimacy and all these, that could be issues. So I feel like.
Well, let me ask you. Yeah. So you're saying, and I know this to be true, that if your wife, you caught her or she told you or something, right, that she was looking at porn and masturbating, I mean, you can get into like, maybe you'd be like, ooh, that's good.
Standing ovation.
Yeah. It wouldn't be considered cheating. However, what if you found out that regardless of money, like maybe she has a gift certificate or something.
By the way, the money things are incredibly irrelevant considering porn is completely free nowadays.
But no, what I'm going to get to things that actually typically cost money, sure. You are, paying money for cam, individual, yes. If people don't know, there are forums or, various websites where you can watch and, an individual who's just in their bedroom in front of a webcam and
or
they
like
have
OnlyFans or all these kinds of things.
Right. Yeah. So those are kind of different too, because with OnlyFans, it can be just pictures or just pre-made videos, but it can also be like live streaming. There's live streaming essentially, right?
Well, can I start an OnlyFans where I play music?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure OnlyFans reached out to me I don't know, a while back, because there was a push by OnlyFans to make them not so porn related, and they knew that I was doing okay on Patreon, and they were trying to entice me with like a better deal. And I was just like, that's okay.
Well, you were like, yeah, but only if I can do porn.
So let's say that you find out that for the past couple years, she has been communicating with and talking to, because you can chat or even just voice chat, maybe even video conferencing, right? So let's say video conferencing and mutual masturbation with a sex worker,
right?
But it's another guy, and maybe there's like a handful of guys, but maybe there's two that one that she tends to frequent. How would you feel about that?
Well, first of all, you're turning me on, man. No, I mean, like, listen, it's hard to say how I would literally feel because she's such a different type of person. But in my mind, I would be very supportive about it until it was an issue with money or amount of time or those kinds of things.
Okay.
Right? Like certainly the amount of porn or whatever that I ever look at or is such.
But this isn't porn. We're talking about interacting with another human. Interacting with another human. Where they're both turning each other on.
Okay, so let me give you an example. I did have a problem. I wouldn't know if a problem. Me and a group of friends had a problem. Let's put it that way. 20 years ago or something like that, where we were spending a lot of time frequenting a strip club. Every week we would go on a Wednesday and we would spend a lot of money at this place. My wife absolutely knew about it, but if she was annoyed about anything, was that that I was spending all this money. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was just burning this money. So that to me was a problem. And in retrospect, I'm like, oh, why was I doing that? That's so dumb. But it was also like with a group of friends and we're like, oh, let's go do this thing, whatever. Okay. So to me, I see issues with those kinds of things. So it goes back to, but if it's just like, it doesn't really affect the bottom line and it's just a thing that is very fun for them to do, I'd be like, yeah. Now, if I felt like it was threatening the relationship, that would be a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
But by definition, if you didn't see any effect on your relationship, then it wouldn't tweak you.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so...
And I realize that that's not... In fact, I don't know if I'm in the minority, but I've had lots of conversations over the years with people that are 100% opposite to that.
Yeah. Well, so when I was deciding on my dissertation many years ago and brainstorming different ideas, as a graduate student will do, one of the ideas that I, briefly landed on was researching this very thing because it was a relatively new thing. Not that camming was new, but the proliferation of it at the time around 2010-ish was, at least from my limited observation, it seemed like it was a bigger threat to marriage, or at least a question.
Oh, interesting.
It was a question, right? Mm-hmm. And so as a couple therapist and as someone who specializes in infidelity, it was a question I had, which is, how do people feel about this? I have a general sense of how people feel about other kinds of things.
Yeah.
The common, and again, not everyone's like this, but the common Seattleite couple is okay with their partner looking at porn and masturbating. They don't necessarily want to see it or hear about it, but as long as it's under wraps, that sort of thing, then they don't consider that cheating. Whereas if you were to have sex with a past partner, that would be considered cheating, not by everybody.
Right.
Or if you were to get drunk and kiss a coworker, even if it was very brief, that would be cheating. So, but with this camming, it was unclear, because on one hand, you could see it being porn, but it's live, and you're but on the other hand, you could see it being that it's in-person sex work, right? Yeah. It's just over video conference. It was this whole new paradigm. Like, what do you? Because so along those lines.
Sorry, I don't know. Are those things legal? Like if someone has a cam session with someone else and they're mutually masturbating or whatever, is that legal, and one person's paying the other?
I don't know. I assume that it is legal.
So the only difference is that's so fascinating.
I assume if it were illegal,
you can't get paid for sex work if your molecules are getting touched, but if just electrons are transacting, you're fine.
Along those lines, to be a porn actor, you are being paid
to have sex.
So it
makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense.
Right, exactly.
Well, because it's not the person paying you isn't the one having sex with you. It's someone else.
But it can be sometimes.
Yeah, I guess
sometimes.
So. I guess you're right.
Your fellow actor is the producer.
That's so.
But anyway,
slippery.
Yeah. So I assume it is not illegal, but I can't because I haven't looked it up. But I didn't do my So long story short, I tell my mentor this, and he's like, if you do that, it could be a mark on your reputation. And I'm like, why? He's like, well, typically what people do their dissertation on is something that they are personally, like in their personal life.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with my personal life. It's just, it has to do with my professional life.
Yeah.
And he's like, let's keep brainstorming, and I don't know if that was good advice or not, but I'm guessing there has been research on this, but
and it's also many years ago. Nowadays, it might be a little different.
Totally, yeah. So it's a thing. I've also had clients that had this as a topic that would come up, where the spouse would be totally fine with porn and masturbation, but when it came to person-to-person video conferencing, then that was like way beyond.
Right.
The problem in the marketplace is that the websites can be the same website. You can have a website that can be just regular porn pictures or video, and on the same website you could just click another button and
then all of a sudden do that.
Yeah, and there's different levels to the cam people, the cam performers, of you are in an audience of 1,000 people or more, and you're just watching someone live stream, right? Yeah. That's one level of involvement. And these are the things I wanted to get into with people, of just like, would you consider that cheating if your partner were to watch as part of 1,000 audience members someone live streaming? Because one could argue that that's just a live video, right? But it's in the present, right?
Right.
And then another level
that's
is
so funny.
Another level is, okay, well, what if they start to chat with the individual as a part of 1,000 people? What if they're like, oh, you're hot, and the performer...
I love finding where that line is.
Right, because it
okay, if it's 1 million people at the same time, it's fine.
Well, but it's interesting, right? Yeah. And these are the things that we get into.
See, I use you've heard of Uber?
Yeah,
I use Luber. Luber is a service where they, you start chatting with someone and they immediately deliver themselves over to your location, but in VR. And so then, it's all safe and good. And
Okay.
yeah. Or at least I think it's VR. It feels really realistic.
Where's the dog? And then, beyond that, what if you're 5 people? And then what if you're one person? And what if you're one person among many that day? Or what if it's one person and you're the main customer and this sex worker has 3 repeat customers that pay for all their bills? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where is it? Because if you said to someone, like if I asked you if your wife were to meet someone at work,
right,
and she and him were to have sex over video conference, would you consider that to be cheating?
Right. Okay. So this goes back to, 2 things. First of all, that seems very messy socially because it's a coworker, right? Number 2, it all goes back to, am I aware that this is happening? Is this all done in secret? Is this robbing us from our relationship and our time? And
so in principle, you're not against it.
The work part would be like, dude, what are we doing here?
Like it would be, you would worry about your wife's, like, what?
Yeah, because, work stuff can get super chaotic.
Yeah. But in terms of threatening to your stability or trust,
I guess,
or the sanctity of your relationship.
There would also be, because I feel like at that point you'd have to start having conversation of like, because is this developing into an actual relationship? Or is it, those kinds of things.
Okay.
Whereas it's like a stranger online, or
but if it wasn't,
if it was at a party one-off thing,
if it was kind of an acquaintance at work, that,
and it could be maybe, but you'd have to. In my case, I'd have to double click into the details. Because it's one of those like, well, wait a minute, because that's where it really starts mattering. Like, well, hold on, I know, but you're also going away for the weekend with this person, like, it's like, wait, what are we doing here?
Yeah. Okay. So to wrap it up, to answer your specific questions, anonymous listener, you are saying that he has an addiction and he agrees he has an addiction. My comment on that is a lot of people will identify or claim, a lot of people identify others as having an addiction, or individuals will claim they have an addiction because they don't understand what compulsive porn use actually looks like, or they are trying to make an excuse for themselves and they are claiming that they have a disease, so to speak, rather than they are making individual choices. Sexuality one's sex drive, if it becomes locked in on a particular stimulus like porn, then you're going to feel compelled, but that doesn't necessarily mean that one has what we would call in the business an addiction or a compulsion. That's one thing. I don't know if that really matters, but going on with other questions that you're raising, that, it hurts. You're saying you discovered that he has been sexting with other women multiple times online. We don't know what that means exactly, if it's with sex workers or cam people, or it's with women that he met on Craigslist or something. It doesn't really matter. You feel shattered. It's devastating. It's a massive trust violation. It sounds like you at least had the understanding that this was not okay. And that can be very hurtful, not only on the obvious front of, wait, I thought that we had a commitment to each other. Does this mean we don't have a commitment? But also the deception and the lies by omission illuminate the possibility of other problems, other lies, other deceptions, other lies. Does he actually love me? Is his middle name actually Christopher? Like
everything's open for question.
Right. So it's devastating. Going on, you say he goes back and forth on whether or not it's cheating and will occasionally apologize. And the thing I'll say here is therapy is the answer. A couple therapists, because this is what I would call an initial foray into a very complicated subject. He can't decide for himself whether it's cheating or not. He can decide for himself how he would react if you would do it, but he can't decide how you should react. And have you talked about it? Most couples don't. A lot of people just figure, well, it's obvious.
Right.
And it isn't necessarily obvious. So everyone needs to have these conversations. It requires being upfront. It requires knowing what you want. It requires being assertive, this kind of thing. I'm not accusing you, non-obsessive of not having talked about it, but there seem to be some signs there, because if he's going back and forth, it sounds like this was never discussed. Now, is it understandable that a couple would never say, okay, is sexting, is that like cheating or not?
1,000-point inventory of everything that's right and wrong. Yeah.
But like I was wondering about in my dissertation brainstorm, it is kind of that way now, because back in the day, before the internet and before social media, before camming, before even pornography, I guess, it was pretty limited in terms of what one could do that would that would constitute cheating, right? I mean, I guess once letters were invented, that you could add that to the list.
And then there were flirting behaviors and things. But yeah, still, now it's like times a million.
Yeah, because if certain things are okay, like pornography, then there could be some, whereas if everything's off, right, off the table, it's just like, I don't want porn, I don't want masturbation, I don't want you fantasize, like, then it would be understood that, okay, well, obviously I can't sext with cam people that I meet, because you could see someone thinking, well, I'm never having physical contact with this person.
But it can get weird even with, nowadays you have VR setups where both people are wearing stereoscopic cameras that can film, so that in VR it looks 3D, the person's right there, and each other is wearing a electronically controlled device that stimulates them at the same time and with the same pulses.
Right. So in the future, you're going to have more elaborate VR setups. And when you have camming, because, to the brain, it could feel like you're actually having sex with another person, but it's not, is that, what if it's an AI? Is that, like all these questions, and it has to be researched and it has to be discussed, because these are real things. So that's one thing, but also, couple therapy with a specialist in infidelity to explore, and also maybe sexuality, and who knows. But then you say, I feel like he's trying to justify his problem. It kind of sounds that way too to me. At the very least, he could have asked. Right? He could have said, if it was a question mark, he could have said, how do you feel about if I were to do X, Y, and Z? Would that be cheating? But he didn't. He just went ahead with it. The other thing I'll say is that I've worked with couples and with individuals who have had very similar presentations of this. And what I have always found is that whether the clients want to explore it or not, there's always a massive iceberg beneath the water on this.
Yeah, sure.
The sexual elements of this, the shame, the who am I? Yep. What am I running away from? The husband, the partner. The porn problem and the sexting might not even be the problem. The problem could just be a lack of understanding what his emotions are, or a lack of intimacy in your relationship, or trauma from his childhood, or something darker in his sexuality that he's running away from, which I've seen before with clients. I'm not saying that's likely, but I'm just saying that but I think these aren't simple matters.
Right. And I think that's a very important thing to bring up too, which is, I'm not saying that this doesn't happen, but in many cases, it's likely that the person doing these things isn't doing it on purpose to hurt the other person.
Right.
They're doing it out of some need that they feel that they need to meet. And that may be a healthy need, or maybe a rooted in trauma, like you're saying, abuse, all sorts of other things.
Right. Yeah. It could be as simple as avoidant attachment.
Like, as an example, I've talked about this before. What is it? Trigger warning a little bit. I'm not going to go into much detail.
Trigger warning on what?
I'm going to say something about myself here.
But you have to tell people what. I see. You can't just say blanket.
Trigger warning. No, just kidding. Trigger warning about things that someone might do related to sexual abuse they experienced.
Just say sexual abuse trigger warning.
Sexual abuse trigger warning. Yeah, but I'm not going to go into detail about it. It's just that I personally, for example, would have certain patterns in my late 20s, early 30s that were risky sexual activities that I didn't recognize at the time were me recreating my abuse. And only until I had therapy, really, and came out the other side, and after several like crazy realizations and breakdowns and things, was I like, oh, what? So obvious. What the hell? If you had asked me at the time, I would have said, what? It's just a thing. It's just fun. It's whatever. Don't think about it too much, But no, it was actually, and it was very interesting because in my case, in those situations, I actually never got any sexual pleasure from those experiences. And I never wondered why.
Right. And if and maybe you had been, in fact, I'm pretty sure you had at least a handful of times been confronted on that, you would have consciously thought at the very least and maybe said, look, I'm just a really sexual guy.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just really horny.
Literally what I would have said.
Yeah.
And then,
but that isn't the case.
And then if you had asked me like, oh, okay. So when you did this, like that was a big moment for you, like a sexual release. I probably would have said, yeah. But in reality, it wasn't. Right. Like when I looked back on it and I was like, oh my gosh, in those moments, I didn't enjoy it sexually at all.
Right.
There was some weird enjoyment, but it turns out it's the kind of enjoyment that as a child I felt of being included in a thing.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to be clear, I wasn't abusing anyone in these situations.
No.
It's just that
you, in a sense, were allowing yourself to be abused.
I was allowing myself, in a sense, to be abused. But I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
So it's possible that someone could be doing a lot of porn or whatever it is and having that cause problems in their life and them not be aware that it's because of some trauma, something, not because they're being mean to their partner, even if in reality it also happens to be mean to their partner or unfair or whatever.
Yeah. So, all right, let's take a break. When we get back, more emails. What do you say?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So this is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Hahn. I'm a therapist, and I'm also a professor. By the way,
my name is Humberto Castañeda, and I repair TARDISes.
So another anonymous listener wrote in. She said, I'm wondering if you're familiar with sudden repulsion syndrome. Have you heard of this, Berto?
No.
Otherwise known as the ick. Have you heard of the ick?
I've heard of ick factor. But
You've heard of ick factor?
Yeah.
Okay. She goes on to say, what causes this and is it possible to overcome? How can you know if it's a personal problem, such as a fear of intimacy, or if it's just your body's way of telling you that the person isn't right for you? Berto, what do you think?
So tell me a little bit about sudden repulsion syndrome. Is this like you were liking someone, you were dating them, all of a sudden you're repulsed by them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Well, all right. So first of all, I had an experience like that, but it was completely unfair. I've talked about this before, so I won't go into too much detail because I've already talked about it. But it was in high school. I had a girlfriend that I liked quite a lot. There's nothing wrong with her. She was great, pretty, very, very lovely person. Loved her. I mean, I didn't love her, but I loved being with her and stuff. She was great. But she lived in a farm, or like in an area that had tons of cows and slaughterhouses and things. So whenever I would go visit her there in that area, it smelled horrible. That area, not her, but I started associating the two. And then because I was a coward, stupid idiot, I just ghosted her. I stopped returning her calls. It was horrible. A year later, she confronted me, and she was luckily in a great relationship, and I felt terrible about it. But anyways, bottom line is, I did all of a sudden flip a bit in my head. I all of a sudden had sudden ick factor.
Were you conscious that it wasn't related to her?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I couldn't.
But so when you thought about seeing her, if she came to you, would you have been cool with that?
No, like I was repulsed.
Like thinking about being with her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, being fully, this is almost like another level to it, because I was fully consciously aware that she didn't smell. She was not a cow. It was like, it just made no logical sense. I was perfectly aware, and I couldn't overcome it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's the same thing, but that happened to me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so what I will say is that it is not, from my understanding, a well-researched psychological construct, but culturally, what I have observed is that I have only heard heterosexual women talk about the ick. That's just my anecdotal experience. Typically, the context, there's a article by The Guardian that was written a couple years ago called "Got the Ick?" And then there's a line here because he was asking people around him if they've ever had the ick, and he said that some women said, yeah. One of them told me she got the ick off a boy who didn't use pillowcases.
Oh.
Another from one.
That is
another from one who wore a lime green shirt.
Okay, what?
So this is something that is often talked about within heterosexual women circles. This is just anecdotal to me. I don't have research in front of me. Apparently, this is from getting the ick or the ick factor from Sex and the City. There was an episode, maybe way back when.
Maybe that's where I've heard. I never watched that show, but it permeated the culture.
So here's my guess. This is just an hypothesis that there are two converging ideas that are being expressed when someone in 2024 says that guy gave me the ick or something like that. One is a very valid notion of believing or listening to your gut, that a lot of people, and I think maybe particularly women who have been through abusive or harmful or they started dating someone who turned out to have been convicted of some a violent crime or even a sexual assault charge or something, that she will have felt something in her gut that was telling her that something wasn't right about this guy. It's in the beginning of a dating situation. But she didn't listen to her gut and she moved forward with the relationship. Then something comes out and you find out that, oh, he is a problem, maybe abusive, something that really indicates that it was not a good idea to date this person. And then they retroactively look back and say, oh, there was I felt something in my gut. And then there's discourse among people online that will say, you gotta listen to your gut. So what I would say to that is, yes, and you can't always know if your gut is giving you the right information.
Sure.
But at the very least, you should incorporate it into your decision-making process.
Yeah.
And you should investigate it. If your gut is you're on date 3 and you've had this feeling in your gut that something is wrong, maybe go slower, maybe a little bit more tentative, maybe look into something. I don't know. What is your gut trying to tell you? Is your gut just having indigestion? Is your gut feeling danger? Is your gut being reminded of a previous? What is your gut trying to tell you?
Okay, so this is so important, and oh my gosh, I wish we would all learn this as we're growing up, and in more detail, like a whole class about this. Because seriously, none of us are aware that what we're gonna do with our first romantic experiences and partners, and even later, of course, is we're gonna project stuff onto them. We're going to bring up a trauma without knowing it. We're going to do all these things, right? And we're not going to know that the weird butterflies or the weird things we're feeling in the stomach, the gut, are things that we can try to open up a little bit and ask questions about. We're not going to think about any of that.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful because, to your point, I think back, and there was certainly not that relationship, a different relationship where I had some odd or some feeling like something wasn't right, but I that's as far as it got. And if I had these tools, this knowledge, I would have maybe even had a conversation with someone, like a friend, about it or something, like, I want to talk about something, and then we might have explored the underlying things, and I would have realized, hopefully I would have realized, oh yeah, no, that's not healthy, that's not good.
So there were things. There was data available to you that if you looked at more closely,
absolutely,
that your gut was trying
100%.
Okay. Because sometimes people have a gut feeling and there isn't any data.
And you're right. And but I would have still been okay. Maybe this process would have led me to realize, or maybe this is just me. I don't know.
Or maybe I should just be a little bit slower.
Right.
And
in this
cautious.
case, it would have definitely helped short circuit some bad experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this has to do with knowing your emotions and your needs,
right.
And not placating or being codependent.
Right, like in this specific case, without telling the whole story, there were a couple of signals where when the relationship started, there were already these things where, one of them was that all the previous relationships had some terrible drama associated with them.
Oh, right.
Right. But I didn't double click on that. I didn't, think about that much. It's just another
You've talked
one,
about her before.
Right. Another one was the love bombing.
Yeah.
and it just felt good, but I didn't. But the net effect was I certainly, and I was only aware of this after the fact, but when I looked back, I was like, oh yeah, I was feeling that there was something not quite right.
Yeah, often with the way that you describe her, there will be that feeling. There's a sense of danger and threat that is not congruent with the overt verbatim communication. There's something that is disingenuous. It's like this is too much. It can't be or there's pressure. There's subtle pressures in the love bombing. Anyway, so with the gut, it's important to pay attention to, but it's not like, a fortune teller.
No.
And it's not like the best diagnostician in the world. It's something definitely to listen to, but it's not it's not your gut isn't omniscient. You know what I mean? Because I'll hear that if you go, you always got to listen to your gut. And I'm like, no, you don't always listen to or don't disregard, always listen to your gut, but don't always comply with your gut. You know what I mean?
There's also something we got to touch on, which is, well, first of all, when we say your gut, well, it literally isn't your stomach. I mean, you might feel something.
Sometimes it can be.
Yeah, but it's still your brain.
It's just a sense. Yeah, it's just like maybe it's sweaty palms or hesitation or.
But as an example, that book, Blink, where one of the things it talks about is this experienced army or maybe naval commander, and they had these war games. Where they had all these people trying all these strategies, and then he beat all of them. But he was using I don't know all the story, but he wasn't using the latest computers or whatever. He was just going off of quote gut. But the gut is just a shorthand for years of actual on the field experience that net out to very quick gestalts happening in his brain.
Right. When I'm a therapist, I am absolutely operating, I guess you could say, from my gut. But it's after decades of experience and training and contemplation, because I can't just stop the session and go, okay, let me look up some research and consult with some people. I have to operate from, to some extent, instinct, or at least the ideas that come into my head about what to do in a particular moment have to come from instinct. But anyway, so the other idea, in addition to the gut, that is being, I think, discussed when people say, that guy is giving me the ick, is this concept that has been proliferating on TikTok and other online areas that, again, is mainly heterosexual young women that are dating and they're conferring and consulting with each other and bouncing ideas off each other.
Right.
And they have developed this construct, this idea that when you feel the ick, and I think most of us understand what that would feel like, the repulsion or disgust or something, that once that happens, there's no coming back from it. That's a notion that I've seen informally bandied about, that like in that article, the Guardian article, he has a lime green shirt on and you don't like it. It's disgusting to you based on a fashion sense or something. And there's no coming back from that. You must reject him at this point. You know what I mean?
That's so extreme.
But that's what is discussed within a certain pocket of the internet.
Sure.
And underneath that, I think is self-protection or the disposable Tinder dating marketplace or a desire to create, quippy TikToks where you get a laugh out of people or a rise out of people. You oversimplify something, or avoidance because you just aren't ready for a relationship and you're looking for any. I mean, that was Jerry Seinfeld's whole thing on the Seinfeld show.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I didn't really watch that show that much, but from my understanding,
every now and then they'd have an episode where he's dating some new person, and one small little detail would prop up to his awareness, and he was done, and there was never coming back from that.
That was the ick.
It's like he'd look at her thumb, and her thumb was like slightly turned. Or
wasn't there one where her hands were bigger?
Hands were bigger. There was, there was all sorts of body parts, or sometimes there was a word that they would say. It was some deep, but it was always some small detail.
And everything else was working out.
Yeah.
Besides that one thing, and he would get what we would call today, I guess, the ick.
Yeah.
And it was played for laughs because it's ridiculous. Why would you and tell me if I'm wrong, but they likely explored that at least Elaine would say, you have an intimacy fear or something.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Well, so I think it was done well in that it was played for laughs. It also was, it was like Jerry Seinfeld in that show wasn't actually the every person. Like, from part of it, he was, because he wasn't the wacky Kramer, and he wasn't the psychopathic George, and he wasn't the, like, chaotic Elaine, right? But he also wasn't that normal. He was, either obsessive compulsive, or he had some weird set of things, including this. And so then the way they would play it is like, we could all relate to his feeling of finding some flaw and then being like turned off, but it was also pointed out how ridiculous that was. Mm-hmm. And I believe there was one episode, wasn't the whole about the breasts being real and they're wonderful, wasn't one of those?
I didn't watch it.
I feel like there was one of those where like he started feeling like they weren't real. I don't remember, but sometimes it bit him, And I think the whole show,
oh, right. Doesn't she walk out and say they're real
and they're wonderful?
Yeah.
The whole show, in a sense, was that, because like the whole thing culminates with them finally paying the Pied Piper in jail for all their ridiculousness.
And
right?
it plays well into the sitcom format, because as soon as Jerry has a girlfriend, you have to incorporate her ongoing.
So that it wasn't just, oh yeah, well that makes sense. Everyone knows that the ick factor is real, and that when you feel it, it should definitely end your relationship.
Right.
It was more like, okay, I can kind of relate, but man, that's also excessive.
Right. So I think that when people say today the ick, it's a culmination and maybe a different combination of all of these things, of either listening to other people who have wise advice about one's gut, or listening to your own advice to yourself because you didn't listen to your gut previously.
Right.
Or it's this semi-ridiculous cultural notion that when you are disgusted with something, then it's tainted. There's he wore a lime green shirt. It's over. And it's also it's immature, right? It's a lack of understanding of what a relationship is like. Now, if someone is not looking for a relationship, they're just wanting to have a lot of very short-term, shallow relationships, which is fine, then go with...
If you don't like someone, don't go spend time with him. It's fine.
He wore a lime green shirt. That's a good enough reason as any other, and so we're done. But if you're actually trying to find someone long-term, that is not the way that the world works. It's not the way attachment works. You are going to experience that kind of ick with your partner periodically for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and guess what? They're going to experience icks from you all the time too.
Yeah, you're not. So that's another element of it, is it's a signal of I'm superior. He disgusted me.
Was it a defense mechanism, maybe? Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is one of the things I love about Good Will Hunting. The whole scene when
Robin
Williams is discussing his relationship and the imperfections and the reality of it, right?
Right.
Which is a notion that you don't hear discussed in movies, right? You never hear about the romantic relationship and all its imperfections, right?
The time she shat her pants as she ran to the bathroom, I just love her even more now, Yeah. So the anonymous listeners, wonder if you knew about the ick, what causes it. What causes it is all sorts of things. It really just depends on what someone's talking about. If someone is 6 months into a loving, secure, committed relationship, and they're just like, yeah, there's just something about that shirt that he just gives me the ick or there's just something about when him and his friends are playing poker that I'll come into the room and the way that they smell or the way they interact, it just gives me the ick. But I'm still with him and I love him and I want, so there's that description. Or if someone is saying he wore a lime green shirt and that gave me the ick, and there's no other reason that I should break up with him, but because I'm such an awesome person who deserves like perfection in their dating profile, then I'm done with this guy. Or I made a TikTok video and it's just kind of funny because it's Seinfeld-esque to like zero in on someone's thumb and just be like, I can't deal with that.
Deal with that.
It's just kind of funny, to have those conversations. But yeah, could it be a fear of intimacy? Absolutely. It could be a fear of intimacy. Could it be a narcissistic signaling? Yes, it could be a narcissistic signaling. Could it be an indication of immaturity? Like when you talk to younger people, put aside romance or sexuality and, we could talk about like food or something. Like if you are in a group, let's just switch to boys. There's like, 7 boys at a birthday party, and there are 3 different pizzas and one, different styles. And the cool kid of the group looks at one of the pizzas and goes, ew, gross, there's mushrooms. Well, there's going to be a pressure there for the other kids to go, yeah, mush, or at the very least not grab that pizza.
Right.
Even if that was their preference, even a secure kid would go like, well, why bark up that tree? It's just as easy to grab this other pizza. It's not that big of a deal. It's really easy to thumb your nose, or what's the
yeah, what is the expression?
Oh, I'm asking a Colombian about idioms.
Thumb your nose.
thumb your or turn up your nose or something.
Turn up your nose, yes.
Okay, it's really easy.
And maybe it is
to stick your thumb up your nose at something. It's riskier and more vulnerable to like something. It's so easy to
DM.
Yeah, right. It's so easy to poo-poo something and say like, that's dumb, and I hate that person, and that politician is ridiculous, and that movie is so stupid. I mean, that movie, that and that thing, and this thing, and this thing, everything is dumb. And with maturity and with self-confidence, you can start to actually extend yourself and say, I actually like that, or I don't know if I like or dislike that thing yet. I'm still exploring that. Whereas if you're immature, you just go ick and you move on.
Okay, so this is very interesting because I feel like the ick factor, just like we, in our previous episode, we were talking about the movie Inside Out, but like there's that disgust character, right? The disgust emotion. I think the ick has a role to play, but you have to be careful how you wield it. Because as an example, in my example I was given, I felt the ick factor because of the smell in the region that this person lived.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting one because that's different because that doesn't fit into the ick.
Well, it's like the Jerry Seinfeld thing. Is like I can't deal with it. She lives in cow country.
But it doesn't. It's you consciously knew it had nothing to do with her, but you knew it's more of a Pavlovian thing. You know what I mean?
Maybe, but it's either well, it's almost worse because it's not even. Well, I don't know if it's worse, but it's like she can't even do. It has nothing to do with her, right? Okay, but she should have felt an ick from me sooner and ended it because I was treating her like crap. Like we went to this water park and it was supposed to be a fun day and all these things, and I was being all moody, barely paying attention to her. And I remember specifically at one point I had my head down, and she's like, "Oh, I think there's," or I actually might have even asked her like, "Hey, is that girl over there checking me out? Can you imagine? You're on a date." And then she's like, "Yeah, maybe." And I'm like, "Oh, why do you think?" And then she's like, "I don't know. Your hair? I don't know." And she was annoyed. And then I was annoyed that she was annoyed. I was being a total jerk.
You were genuinely curious if she thought that another girl was checking in.
Yes, because of my damage, my trauma. Okay. But in that moment, she should have gotten the ick factor.
Well, so that's good that you're bringing this up because this is another element to it, which is that if you lack a language around how to analyze your feelings and listen to yourself and value yourself and understand your needs, then you will just shortcut to the ick, right? Because if she were to come to me and I'm her friend and she's like telling me what her experience is, I wouldn't say like, "Oh, sounds like you have the ick." That's such an oversimplification.
Yeah.
I'd be like, "How did you feel? What do you want?"
Yeah, right.
Those are nerdy conversations that don't go well when you're trying to entertain people on TikTok. It's funnier to say the ick.
Yes.
Anyway, as you can tell, I'm not a fan of this concept.
I do wish.
I haven't seen it used in a context that I have said, "Oh, okay, I can see that." I've never had that experience.
Well, I do wish to apologize four-dimensionally to her, both for that horrible day and for the fact that she didn't end it sooner with me before I had a chance to hurt her, break her heart.
40 years ago. And I will absolutely contend that the ick might be used in legitimate, understandable, or at least neutral situations, because I haven't observed the entirety of its usage. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break. We'll get back. More emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So, YouTube member Amy from Portland, she says, I'm curious about walkaway wife syndrome. So, but just chiming in, Berto, have you heard about walkaway wife syndrome?
What are all these things I've never heard about? Maybe I am. Maybe I do need to get on TikTok.
Well,
walkaway wife syndrome?
Yeah. And, the other thing is these concepts on TikTok are, pretty heavily gendered. This concept could easily be applied to anyone of any gender, but never mind that right now.
So this is a wife that decides to one day walk away from the relationship.
Yes, and or she has detached and she has done everything except for divorce. Like she's still married, but she's a walkaway wife in that, or she has walkaway wife syndrome in that she's willing.
She's at any moment might just do it.
I don't know what they mean from the metaphor, but the context is that they have emotionally left a long time ago.
I see.
And they can't be brought back. Like they've been slowly drifting away from an asshole husband or a cold husband or a workaholic husband.
This is so dumb. It's just walk away person. Like this is
I know, exactly. And the way people talk about it, it's like only women.
And this isn't just about relationships. The walkaway syndrome is real in many contexts. At work, with normal friendships, in families, definitely with romantic relationships.
Now, might one say, and I don't even know if I would say this, that among heterosexual relationships, might there be more women who find themselves slowly drifting away from an asshole than husbands slowly drifting away from an asshole? I think culture would say yes, but I would have a lot of questions about that.
Does it have to just be about assholes, though? Or could it just be that the relationship is soured for many complex reasons and this person is essentially all but walked away?
I think it's typically used with, like, not like abusiveness, but like people that from description would say that is not a good husband. They would say that
but syndrome makes it sound like it's their fault. Walkaway wife syndrome. You've got walkaway wife syndrome. That sounds like a disease.
Well, the way it's used is it's not. They're not. The way it's used is they're not being blamed. Going on with the email. I'm curious about walkaway wife syndrome. For the past 3 years, I would say that I have put up an unbreakable emotional wall with my husband. We have been married for 26 years. The kids are in their 20s now, and the dust has settled. The history between us is long, and you realize that the pain and hurt start to rise to the surface. I have friend-zoned him emotionally. I have given him 26 years, and emotionally I have checked out. Can you explain walkaway wife syndrome? My answer to you, Amy from Portland, is, I don't know how this is being defined precisely. I've only picked it up from context, but I would focus not so much on if this is a syndrome or not, because that sounds like if you have COVID, then there's a physical object that is multiplying in your body, and it can be measured by science. You have disease associated with...
Well, you have microchips injected in you.
You have the disease associated with SARS-CoV-2. It is a syndrome. It's a disease, whatever. To say that this is a syndrome, I think makes it sound like everyone's experience is the same, or that it's only with wives or something.
Right.
The phenomenon that you're talking about is well understood without this phrase. All you have to say is, we've been married a long time, and you say, past 3 years, I would say I've put up an unbreakable wall The kids are in their 20s now. The history between us is long, and you realize so I have been hurt by him, or this marriage has been hard for me, and I have built up a wall against him, and I don't know if I can turn back time, to quote Cher.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do that. I don't think anyone would be confused as to what you're talking about there. Yeah. We don't have to invoke some sort of new phrase, walkaway wife syndrome. Now, if you want to walk away, if you want to leave, you're entitled to that.
Oh, is that where Wawawiwa comes from?
and maybe you have good reasons. And couple therapy could be in order if you're considering staying in the relationship. I've worked with a lot of couples in your scenario. It's a very common flashpoint for couples that when you're raising your kids, as long as things are under a certain threshold, you persevere and you put your head down and you survive, and you have parallel lives, or you kind of ignore each other, or you avoid certain topics, and you get by, and you raise your kids, and you have good moments, you have bad moments, but you're not close. And when you have a couple drinks in you and you're talking to your friends, you're just like, yeah, I just don't know if I want to be in this marriage anymore. But to contemplate divorce, the logistics and the disruption to the family, and there's no compelling reason to leave it. So you just keep going down that road, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a choice that you make. But then once the kids move out and the dust settles, as you put it, you don't have that distraction anymore. And you could argue you finally have the luxury to think like, well, now what do I want? Now I'm to some extent over with sacrificing my life for these kids. I'm now able to think, okay, what do I want for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want to be with this person anymore. And I might have divorced them in my mind a long time ago, now that I think about it. And what do I do? Can I reverse that? And the answer is potentially, maybe not, but the road to explore that is either through individual or couple therapy.
Yeah, and the thing I was saying earlier is, I don't mean to minimize this, because I feel I've certainly experienced these kinds of things. I know other people that are very close to me that have. But I think that this is a human phenomena that occurs in a lot of different contexts. It's just that, of course, the person you spent with decades with, that would be one of the most important, or maybe the most impactful ones. But as an example, I've experienced something that I would call walkaway employee syndrome at a job previously, where it got to the point where I had essentially already left, and I spent one last year where I was like, there was nothing that would have changed my mind. And in fact, that last year was actually the best year I had there. And nothing actually that bad happened that year. In fact, everything went well. But it was too little too late. I had already made my mind a year previous, and I eventually did leave. And throughout that year, I friend-zoned the company and everyone, in a sense, because I was fine. I was there, but we were just friends. And then I left. And how we got there was from a period of abuse that I was experiencing, and from feeling completely helpless and feeling like hopeless and helpless and abused. And so after a few years of that, it got to the point where I was like, I am no longer in love with this thing. I am no longer here. I want to leave. But in my case, I didn't do it immediately, like a snap, throw the desk over, and it was a planned thing. Mm-hmm. But I was checked out. I wasn't checked out in the sense that I didn't do my work. I actually did great work that year. But it was emotionally.
Yeah, well, let me ask you, because there's another pathway, because I've actually talked with one of our mutual friends about this very thing, that for me, I had a similar, not the same, but I'd been at Antioch, and informally I'm still at Antioch because I plan on teaching in the future. But I'd been an employee of Antioch for many, many years, and had varying levels of involvement. At some point, it was emotionally hard for me to be as emotionally involved as they were asking me to be, and as involved as I actually expected myself to be. And it wasn't as a professor, the teaching part of it and the student part of it, that was always consistent. This was administration,
right?
budgeting and talking to the boss and the boss of the boss, talking to marketing and finance and, just all the different departments that you have to deal with when you're program director and whatnot. And I said to myself, I can't do this anymore. But what I did is I just scaled way the fuck back and said, and you could argue that if you asked me, I would say that I resented some of the ways that I was treated by systems and by some individuals. And my enthusiasm was less. But I didn't want to leave. But I definitely didn't want to be as exposed and vulnerable and involved and overlapping with elements and people that I didn't appreciate. And so I scaled back and focused on teaching and students, which never got in my way. And I was willing to do that for a long time. I would have done that for a long time. And I had a big wall up. There were certain meetings that I was mandatoried to go to. It was mandated that it was mandatory to attend these meetings, certain meetings, but I wouldn't go because I knew that emotionally it was likely to bother me severely and maybe even ruin this job for me such that I would have to quit one day. So it was a self-preservation. Now, this isn't a marriage, right? Because typically in a marriage, you don't want to live in a half-measure marriage. You know what I mean? But some people do, but most people don't.
Work, you spend so much of your life at work.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't want to minimize, yes, like the relationship, but look, to me, it sounds like you had a big old case of the WAPS. Walkaway professor syndrome.
Oh, I thought you were going to say wet ass pussy. but the analogy maybe to marriage would be that can you alter the nature of your marriage? Do you want to? And can you? And diversify your attachments a bit, we're really great in this capacity, but I need to scale back and I need to invest more in these other people. Yeah. And you could argue that that's analogous kind of to what I did with I was like, I want to be here. I love it at this level, but beyond it, I can't and I won't, and you can't make me.
Well, and even, sorry, go ahead.
So with the Walkaway, we're still talking about Walkaway wife syndrome. Yeah. So my question to you, Berto, is with that job, you couldn't tolerate it the way that it was. And then once you made the choice to leave, you had the best year you'd ever had.
Yep.
Even though the job was the same and the people were the same.
That's right.
So it was a combination of the way that the system was and the people were and your approach to that system.
That's right.
And those people. Once you changed, but they didn't change, and suddenly you're having a great time. So that's what I did. But what you're saying is the only reason why you achieved that was because you knew you were going to leave. But my argument, because I've told this to people, our mutual friend, because he was going through this, and I asked him, if you leave, because he wanted my advice and he wanted to, and I was like, if you leave, what's the chance that you're gonna get as good of a job, right? And he was like, it'll definitely be a step down. And I was like, well, what's the chance that the next group of people you work with are going to be any better? And he's like, well, not likely. And I'm like, well, can't you just scale? It's no skin off my back, but can't you just scale back and put up some walls and make it your own and enjoy it, and have lower expectation, or just start drawing boundaries. It's just like, fuck you, I'm not going to do that anymore. Yeah. And then you get it wrapped around your own finger,
I think there's many situations where that would be fine. In fact, I had gotten to the point mentally, and the only reason I was really able to do this is because I was working with a mentor, a coach, like a life coach. Which is sort of a type of therapist, right? They weren't a licensed therapist, but they were a professional coach, and it gave me some help. But in my case, I didn't feel those other feelings. I did feel like I could go find something at least equivalent, if not better. But more importantly, I definitely felt like I wasn't of the opinion that my next environment would be just as toxic. I was pretty sure it wouldn't.
Okay.
That said, I could see.
But you are rolling the dice.
I'm rolling the dice. Yeah. And I could have seen a scenario, especially if like I couldn't, which was true a few years previous to that, where I couldn't afford the risk of losing the income or something like that, where that system would have helped me anyways. So let's put it this way. I was there 5 years. Out of those 5 years, 4 years were absolute torture.
Yeah.
1 year was fine.
Yeah.
If I had had that mentality and those systems in place, I might have had 5 okay years, 5 fine years,
right,
and then still left or not. You know.
Yeah. The reason why I bring this up is mainly because of my, I guess, frustration with our mutual friend that was going through this. I'm not frustrated with him. I was frustrated for him.
For him, yeah.
That he was in a situation where, on paper, his best option was to stay at the current job, but draw boundaries and lower expectations, you know, because moving to another job, there's all these complications, and in all likelihood, it would be overall worse, you know,
right.
And I've seen this happen with many people, because you just get this seed, that gets planted of just like, fuck these people.
Sure.
I don't want to give them the satisfaction anymore.
Sure.
Fuck you, I'm out of here. But is that really what's best for you? Now, all of this is completely irrelevant to walkaway wife syndrome, because typically for people, you don't want to have to make compromises in a marriage.
Okay.
With like the meaning and the closeness and the intimacy.
Yes,
and that kind of.
but I still like where you were headed, because I guess my conclusion of my experience, it wasn't that. It was good that I stuck around for 5 years. I actually wish I would have left sooner. But in the end, I learned an important lesson, which was walking away from something, first of all, can be done. Second of all, doesn't have to be some big dramatic flip the desk exit. I don't have to burn a bridge to do it, for example. It can be done on my terms. Now, granted, I got a good amount of luck that I did end up finding a replacement job, and it was a good time for the economy when I did it, and blah, blah, blah. That's all true. But I guess what I would say as a piece of hopeful advice to this person would be, hey, after you go through your process, and if you decide that maybe it is time for you to move on, just know that there is a possibility, there is a way to do it. I don't know which way, you'll have to find that out, but there's likely a way to do it in which it isn't disastrous, in which it actually might feel okay, even maybe for both of you, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, I would say that when I left in such good terms. That like they wanted me to stay. It's just that I was done and I was moving on, right? Now, the analogy breaks down because you don't want him to be like begging you to stay if that's the case, you know, but I'm just saying it doesn't have to end with this horrible dramatic thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's rare, but I've had couples come to me with that plan, or it's by session 3 determined that dissolution is what they're both headed towards, and therapy can help with that. Yeah. Okay, one more email and then a final question. Patron Audrey from Canada, she says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. I have a question about my ex-husband and myself. We have been divorced for over 20 years, but recently started spending more time together. We have been divorced for over 20 years, but recently started spending more time together." Ooh.
Yeah.
"We divorced because he lived in Holland and I felt I could not live there and moved back to Canada. We have an adult son together. We have been visiting each other and enjoying being together. He still lives in Holland. The issue is I don't feel like being intimate with him. It's not only him. My sex drive has diminished the last couple of years. I'm 50, and I actually enjoy being alone. I am happy with spending time with him, visiting each other, traveling, even sleeping in the same bed, but not being intimate. He does want more, FYI. So it sounds like he wants to have sex. My question is it too much for me to ask us to possibly build a relationship with no sex? I have talked to him about this, and he thinks this is only a friendship if we don't have sex. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. I really value your podcast." Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm not saying you can't have a relationship with a person like that. I'm just saying that if both people have to be on the same or at least similar page, at least in the same book, if one person's like, well, no, we're going to be seeing each other all the time, you're going to be sleeping in my bed, and I'm still very sexually active and desirous, and I desire you, it's going to be torturous for us not to, and that's going to feel imbalanced. I would say that would cause problems pretty quickly. That's my opinion. Now, again, does that mean therefore you shouldn't be friends? You can't be? No, of course not. Like if it sounds like you guys are connecting on tons of levels, it would just seem fair, again, my opinion, to be very clear. Like, yeah, this likely won't work sexually and in that sense, and that way the other person can make their decision about. And it sounds like they're being offered that opportunity to make that opinion and that decision. And, if it doesn't work in that romantic way, it doesn't work in that romantic way. But I do feel my rolling of the dice would be, you're probably going to have
Your rolling of the dice?
Rolling of the dice.
What's that mean?
It's the old expression that means, if I were a betting person.
Oh, is that what it means?
I guess so.
Oh, okay.
If I were a betting person, aka my rolling of the dice is, always bet on Berto. No, you're likely going to run into friction and issues that may not be easy to overcome over time.
Yeah. So what I would say, Audrey from Canada, is that one thing, if you care to, you don't have to, is to look into reasons why your sex drive has diminished. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. It's not a pathology. You can live a perfectly happy life, sometimes a happier life without sex in it. But, hormones or lifestyle or experiences or something. Yeah, and you can have a diminished sex drive and still occasionally have sex. You're not saying that your sex drive is gone, but maybe it is. Anyway, so that's one area that you could explore that's maybe even independent of this question with your ex-husband. Getting to the main part of your question my question is it too much to ask to possibly build a relationship with no sex? No, it's absolutely not too much to ask. It's possible that he'll be bummed out on that level, but overall, it's what's best for him. You get older, you start making compromises about things, and maybe throughout life, but I think, in situations like this as well. And it's not too much. You're just asking. Would it be too much for you to force him or trick him? Yes, that would be too much, but it's never too much to ask.
Yep.
And you absolutely deserve to ask and have a discussion about that. The other thing is that what it sounds like you're looking for is companionship. I don't know what sort of definitions or words you want to put to it, but for a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people, we want a companion or a set of very close, intimate companions, whether we have sex with them or not. Someone that you just know you're going to spend the rest of your life together. Someone that you call when something weird or exciting happens. Someone that knows your daily routine. Someone that deeply cares about you. Someone who's just there, that you don't have to call up and invite over. They're just there with you, And that's what you want with him. It's possible that there's a way forward if the sex thing is an incompatibility that is too big of a deal, where he has sexual partners or he has other people in his life, or he tries to find those other people or something, while the two of you have a deep companionship, right? That isn't just being friends. You're saying, I've talked to him about this and he thinks this is only a friendship. Well, what does that phrase mean? Only a friendship. A friendship can sometimes be deeper and more long lasting and more meaningful than any sexual relationship you have, depending on the situation. So I don't know if you're open or he's open, but polyamory-esque type of relationship, or at least thinking outside of the box in terms of what a relationship configuration might look like between the two, because it sounds like the two of you want to be in each other's lives, and you definitely both are compatible and enjoy having that companionship with each other, and you don't come across that very often. So to explore other configurations that might involve, like I said, him dating other people, or I don't know, other kinds of things.
The one thing I'll say though is, if he's already stated his opinions, just an opinion, but that this is more that what she's describing is a friendship, it's quite possible that opinion means to him that he wants a romantic and sexual relationship right now. with someone, and maybe he was hoping it would be her, but if that's not going to work, then they can be friends, but he still wants that with someone else.
Right, that's what it sounds like. Yeah.
And so if that's the case, a question for her is like, would she be open to just being friends? Or to your point, what is a friendship can be super meaningful, but meaning for him having that boundary where he's still going to have a romantic and sexual relationship with someone else, but he's going to be very close as a friend to you as well. And, that's a conversation.
Yeah. And we are hemmed in by our culture and its notions that, if a man and a woman are in a relationship,
right,
then there are two boxes. You're either, romantically, sexually involved, or you're just a friend.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more fucking boxes than that.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, and honestly, you get older and you start getting real with this shit, and you're like, I'm done with those two boxes.
Right.
I want to start
unbox some stuff.
I want to start exploring with some other boxes that don't involve my box being involved in any of this stuff. Well, that does it for that episode. Oh, one question, Bruno.
Okay.
So today is Friday, and Election Day is next week. Any advice for people dealing with it emotionally in the United States and really beyond? People outside the United States are impacted by this whole thing as well.
Okay, so I'm going to try to do this from a perspective that's positive, because I am, like probably many people, very worried and stressed about what might happen in both cases. If my candidate, let's just say, if Trump wins, I am very worried about my future personally. I am literally myself worried about whether I can stay here. So that's one thing. But I'm also worried about what will happen if Vice President Harris wins, which is that there might be instability and violence and other things. So I'm very worried. But in life, there's things you can control and things you can't control. There's something I can control, which is I can vote. I can make sure I vote. And I can make sure that I am being close with my friends and my family as this process unfolds, and that I am essentially available for my family, because I could let my anxiety and my fear take over, and then all of a sudden I'm not being a good parent or a good husband. So I'm trying to make sure I don't let any of that happen, that I don't obsess or any of that stuff. So to keep things positive, we have actually gone through a lot, and right now I would say that the trend of the world is still seemingly in the positive direction. There is climate change, and that is a thing looming. But as far as people overall, the world is more civilized and more peaceful, believe it or not, than it's ever been in the past. And we can vote. We can still vote. So let's do it. Let's go out. Let's vote for what might preserve that ability to vote. And let's take some deep, calming breaths with our friends and family.
And everyone out there, in addition to that, take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.